How's it going? And welcome back here to the Shuffle Squads channel. We are going to be covering for you another meta forecast. We have Dortmund in Germany coming up this weekend, which is the first legal tournament for Paldean Fates, which is really exciting. There's a couple of cool new cards that we'll talk about here. But if you want to learn what the best deck is to play for that regionals, if you're attending, or maybe if it's just cups or challenges, this is the place to be. And this is the meta forecast to watch. So stick around. We have lovely guests joining us here. We're going to start this roundtable discussion off here with one of our very own TSS members. I know that there's three here with us, but Jerrick Gumila is joining us as one of our regular guests. Jeremy, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody watching?
Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Jerrick Gumila, also known as Jem. I'm a part of the Shuffle Squad, and I'm just glad to be here today. We'll talk a little bit about Pokemon.
Cool. And we also have Jerrick, Jeremy's brother, the other half of the Gumila twins here. And Jerrick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jerrick, also a part of the Shuffle Squad, and hopefully you find this really helpful today.
Cool. And we also have fresh off their top four spot here, Robb is joining us. Ian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Robb, newer member of Shuffle Squad, been playing Pokemon for forever at this point, it feels like, and excited to do my first meta forecast with TSS.
Awesome. And streamer extraordinaire, we have Ursiiday joining us here. Ursi, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Hi guys, I'm Ursi, or Ursiiday. I stream on Twitch, and I post on Twitter a lot, so I do Pokemon stuff, mainly online tournaments, but it's great to be here.
Very cool, and lots of awesome finishes in the late night tournaments as well. So if you haven't checked out the late night events, definitely click the link down below in the description. You could check those out and play online in the biggest tournament for Pokemon TCG too. But with all that being said, we're going to hop right into it so you can get some knowledge in that brain of yours watching this meta forecast. I want to talk about some of these new techs and new decks going into the regionals. We have Lost Box coming back with a vengeance, I think. So we're going to kick it over to Jem. Now, Jem, do you think that Lost Box is going to start to show up in numbers over in Germany? We know that the European players usually tend to go to some of the more action-style decks like Gardevoir and Lost Box. But with Lost Box having a pretty good placement in Knoxville, do you think that'll translate over?
I most certainly think it will, just because I feel that we were in a good point of the meta where a couple months Lost Box was always a decent play. It was just one of those plays where people didn't necessarily want to sit there and flower select for 9 rounds, but it was never in a spot where it was unplayable. It was at worst, I feel, like a tier 2 deck, depending upon what variant you play. And then, especially with the new set, Paldean Fates, bringing a little bit of a hype, along with reliable, a mechanic we know that works is the Lost Zone. I could definitely see a lot of players playing it and doing well with it just because, like I said, they can throw in some of their spice from the new set, but in addition, know that they're playing with an engine that's proven to work, proven to win. And as you mentioned before, that meta over there is more lean towards actions with Gardevoir winning and Lost Box topping a lot of Knoxville. People will definitely be leaning towards those variants for sure.
Gotcha. Now, Jerrick, I'm going to flip it over to you. Do you think that there's going to be a big shift back to the old faithful Lost Box instead of Sablezard? I know Sablezard got some hype going into Knoxville. So what are your thoughts on the two different variants here?
I think kind of after Knoxville, some of these older, but we'll call them newer Lost Box decks will definitely come back. The Super Effective Glasses one, I know I saw people toying around with that, and it seemed to me more popular in EU than over here in NA. So I think we'll definitely see some of that. I think Sablezard will kind of stay the same where it was at, so not a huge part of the meta, but will still be there. And I wouldn't be surprised to see things like what I'll call Tord Box or Paradox Box, Lost Box decks coming back just because of its success recently. I think people are going to say, oh, okay, so the deck is good, I can play it, and they're going to feel confident enough to roll up to a tournament with it.
Gotcha. Now, we did see a lot of the meta shift over to those bigger decks, Charizard and Roaring Moon. So, Ian, do you think that Lost Zone Box in general, any sort of comfy decks, are safe with the way that the meta's been shifting if people are tending to play that?
I mean, I think the answer is just yes. Currently in this format, there is many little shifts, but overall there is, I think, obvious many top 2-3 decks. So if it continues to go this way, which it will for the next couple of months, we'll see Lost Zone keep dominating. Like Lost Zone Giratina will be the best deck until rotation, so I doubt to see there's going to be any very much change.
Yeah, exactly. And now with Giratina being one of the most heavily played decks in the past handful of regionals here, we do also have with Paldean Fates the new TM that allows you to do that 280 damage as long as your opponent has the one prize card left. So Ursi, what do you think about adding this card into the newer meta? Does it change some things? Does it allow these Lost Box decks to do a little bit better because now you don't have to rely on Radiant Charizard to hit those high numbers?
I think it'd be super interesting to see the TM in the list. I'm not really sure how much we'll see, but it'd definitely be interesting. Both with I think the Cramorant ability does synergize with that, with my understanding. I could be wrong with that.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. It's an awesome way to use that attack too.
Yeah, I think that could be really interesting. And even with what I was saying, Sablezard, does Sablezard's ability also work with that?
So Radiant Charizard's Excited Heart ability, I think that will also bring down the attack cost too. So that's another way that you could play it.
Yeah, I think both would be an interesting way to see it. I can't wait to see how much they do with it, or if it'll actually show up.
Yeah, exactly. So super interesting card. Really can't wait to see what lists are actually incorporating this. So if you are a fan of Lost Box, maybe this is time to sleeve it back up and bring it to Dortmund, so that way you can play your favorite Lost Box version and test out that new TM. So we're going to kick it over to another deck that we briefly talked about here, and that's Charizard EX. Now, Charizard going into Knoxville was up there as probably one of the most heavily played decks for the tournament, and it actually was. But are we thinking that maybe Charizard is starting to slip off a little bit? It didn't have any high placements in top 8, at least. So, Jerrick, what are your thoughts on where Charizard is right now? Is it just kind of getting pushed out of the meta?
So in terms of Charizard as a whole, I think obviously the deck still saw an incredibly high percentage of the meta share, but I think that maybe different groups that were accustomed to seeing bringing it, for example, Azul, Grant Manley group, the TSS group, they didn't bring that necessarily to the tournament. So that could attest to maybe why some of the placements weren't as high. But I also think a lot of the decks are starting to figure out how to beat Zard and counter it. Obviously, the Rise of Roaring Moon doesn't help it. But I still think with all of that, Zard will still be heavily played. I don't think it's old news. People love Charizard. We never get a playable Charizard. We're about to rotate, so they're going to stick with it, kind of just play Charizard as is. And the deck is still incredibly strong, right? It still has really good matchups. 330 is still a hard thing to hit. Pidgeot, the quick search ability is still incredibly powerful. And I feel like the addition of Radiant Charizard helps it against things like Giratina, some of these newer decks like Roaring Moon. So I don't think Charizard dies, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was the most played deck at every tournament coming up until rotation.
Absolutely, and I think even post-rotation too, Charizard still seems to be a strong deck. Now, we did see some adaptation to other lists, not just the Pidgeot Zard, which definitely seems to be the winning deck out of the two variants, but there's Bibarel Zard that was talked about because of TM Devo. Now, Ian, what are your thoughts about using the Bibarel Zard into a tournament like this where we might see things like Lost Box and Glasses Box come into play?
I think the decks are actually pretty similar in power level and competitive viability. I think that still probably Pidgeot Zard is going to be the more popular / better build, but the version with heavy TM evolution and Professor Turo and was it Charizard Barrel are both very powerful. So the deck could see some play, but I highly doubt that there's going to be very much. But the deck is strong. If you get to your preferred build, at least with Barrel Zard, as like I said before, I think they're both very close. So it's really just up to preference for what you prefer.
Yeah. Now, as far as big decks, big beefy decks like Charizard go, Ursi, why don't you talk to me? We see that there's Roaring Moon seems to be one of those decks that has come out of the shadows, is one of the most played decks now. It's pretty scary into Charizard. So are we thinking that we're going to see counters now to Roaring Moon, like maybe a way to get your Radiant Zard back in?
I definitely think Charizard still has a pretty good matchup against the Roaring Moon. It can definitely be scary, especially with how they're adapting the list. But I definitely think people also just love the play style that Zard brings, where it can just hit heavy, and especially with Pidgeot being able to search whatever they roughly need, we're going to see it continue to be played.
Okay, absolutely. And it also counters Mew, and Mew we definitely don't want to see at this tournament. So does Roaring Moon. But I want to talk a little bit more about Roaring Moon. Jem, you and I kind of went back and forth a little bit on how Roaring Moon's been built. I know that we were working right before Knoxville with Jerrick's list and seeing the catchers build, the water removal out of the deck, so that way it's just mono dark, just like Ross Cawthon's list. Do you think that Roaring Moon is still going to be a strong meta call into this next regional here with all the new cards?
I definitely think so, and the main reason for it is just because, regardless of what build you play, whether you're playing all dark with catchers or you're playing water across Witcher Clone, I think in general the deck is already incredibly fast, incredibly strong, incredibly consistent, and then having that factor of either A, being able to use a draw supporter and a gust if you're playing the catcher build, or B, playing something where you can cancel and clone and take a 2-prize knockout against 1-prize decks to kind of swing that early game pressure. I think regardless of which combination you're going for or you choose to roll up with, in general, Roaring Moon with the right pilot can be very, very dangerous just because of its uncapped damage potential, super strong draw ability, and then, like I said, just being able to rip on the first turn. It's pretty dangerous. There's not a lot of decks in the format that can do that. So I think that it's definitely a good play for this weekend.
Awesome. So we're going to flip the script here. Those are two big, beefy, hit 'em up style decks. Now we've got a little bit more thought again in this deck. It's Gardevoir. Now, Ursi, I know that you've been playing pretty much solely Gardevoir for some of these online tournaments here, and I want to know what your thoughts are going into a bigger regional again, where it seems like those bigger decks like Charizard and Roaring Moon have a tough time against Gardevoir. Do you think that we're going to see that new stadium Moonlit Hill also?
I would love to see an increase in Gardevoir again, especially with the Eve event coming up. Moonlit Hill will be super interesting to see how it actually gets played. Though I do worry slightly with the increase of Lost Box as well, that we're going to see a more increase in ties up here. And I do think, at least even personally, I have been moving away from Gardevoir more to Charizard so that I can stay away from all the number of ties that happen IRL and at regionals. So
Gotcha.
a lot to think about.
Yeah, exactly. And now, Ian, you just came off of your your top 4 match versus Gardevoir. Does Gardevoir seemingly give a lot of bigger decks or even Lost Box decks a hard time? What are your thoughts with that matchup specifically?
Was it Lost in Giratina, or like you mean Lost in general, correct?
Yeah, Lost Zone decks in general versus Gardevoir.
I think the matchup's actually pretty good for Gardevoir. I'm talking more generalized. I think the Giratina versus Gardevoir is incredibly close, but one of the cool things I'll say about Gardevoir versus Lost Zone is you destroy like the Sableye Radiant Charizard builds. SF14 is close, but it can really come down to whoever the better player usually will win in matchups like that. So I think that if you believe you are a very strong Gardevoir player, you should keep playing the deck, as we saw at one Knoxville, and it's been dominating the spreadsheets for a while, and in theory it's been one of the best decks ever since Rhydon has been starting to decline in popularity, which has been quite interesting to see, as it was around second for multiple events, but now it's slowly declining as Roaring Moon is starting to take that percentage of the meta, as players who like Miraidon will rather play a deck like Roaring Moon, which has better matchup against like decks like Charizard. So Gardevoir is in a really strong position, and Lawson, it's good. Lawson's a reason why.
Right. Now, we're talking about the speed of that, too, between Ursi and Ian, playability-wise. Jem, why don't you talk to me about the build itself? Are people honing in on a specific build? Do we think that we're going to see research back in these lists now? Maybe Turo is gone for good. Avery seems like a bad card in the meta. So Gardevoir players, what are they thinking right now?
As a Gardevoir player myself, I think that I can speak for a lot of people that have been on the deck for a while when I say that we're pretty much, we're going to drop Avery's just because we feel that the better player in the mirror usually wins anyways. There were games where I don't take, like, my opponent takes 3 prizes before I do, but they're over allocating their resources and I could come back and win the game. So Avery's definitely not a thing. I do think research will stay and continue to gain popularity just because of all of the pressure that Roaring Moon puts. I didn't realize until I played against a Roaring Moon, even though I have Mirage Step, just the fact that they're so fast, it was really, really annoying to work around. So having researches, being able to get to my resources and pieces that I need quicker are super, super essential. And then I think in general, with the threat of the Mawile and Lost Zone, people still might find a way to put in one Professor's Turo. However, I don't think it's necessarily needed. If you guys got to check round 15 of Swiss, Azul versus Edwin, you could kind of see that there's ways to play around it. And if Edwin could have found that collapsed stadium before the Jirachi was brought up, like, that's a totally different game. And Edwin would have walked away with game 2 versus it, like, being pretty close. So as you guys can see, like, Gardevoir, just because there's so many actions, so many different capabilities of the deck, it all comes down to the pilot, the decision making from the very first turn all the way to the end. So I think that Gardevoir, we're going to stay strong with research, be a little more aggressive, potentially 3 candy. And then, not really tech for things like the mirror, just because we feel like we could get there. Probably dropping Worker, just because, as Ian mentioned, that Tina's very close anyways. And usually, both players are very well tested into that matchup, whether it's a Tina player or the Guardy player. If they're kind of at the top tables making a deep run, they should know how to play that matchup very well. And where that, like, little card won't really make a difference. It's just going to come down to who plays it better and then who finds the pieces when they need it.
Exactly. Now, panning off of that, Jerrick, what do you think if somebody's thinking about, this is a great time to sleeve up Guardy and go into this event? What are the important matchups in the meta that we have right now that you should definitely know as a Guardy player how to play against?
So the matchups you should definitely know if you want to sleeve up Guardy. Obviously the Charizard matchup, the Giratina matchup, which I know they've touched on, so I won't get into it. The Roaring Moon matchup, while it is favored for Guardy, it is a newer matchup that people might not have tested. So I think you at least want to get acclimated with it and kind of just see how the matchup, pans out so you're not caught by surprise. And then with the inclusion of, like, Paldean Fates, Moonlit Hill, does it really help you into Lost Box? Does it throw off some of that Sableye Cramorant math? I think that's worth testing into also, especially with that stadium, seeing if you can, get the damage healed off, more than enough times to make it relevant. But besides that, things like Miraidon, its worst enemy, it is dying down. So I don't think you should test into the Miraidon matchup as much. But definitely Charizard, definitely Tina, and definitely Roaring Moon, and then those Lost Box variants.
Perfect. And then what I want to ask, because Ian's on here with us, I want to know, where did all the Tina believers go? There's so many people, it seemed like, for Knoxville, they were on Tina up until that event. People switched off of it. Ian, you actually switched onto Tina for the event. So talk to me a little bit about that. Why did you make the decision to go to Tina, and why might somebody not necessarily want to play?
Game 3 finals of Charlotte, when Vinny prized 3 Tina V, I looked over at Isaiah Chaville and said that if Vinny won this game, I would play Tina. So that's really the reason why I played it. Other than that, I think the deck, though, is in very strong position. It's just high variance, these events, who does well, who doesn't. So let's say it's like, I know, like, John Ang, he made day 2, but it's like, he didn't do as well. I did better. But again, it's like these, like, couple matches. So I think the deck is still incredibly strong. It's just, random variance. There's just so many players, you can't really, I think, use results fully for if a deck's good or not, or, like, how powerful it is, because I would still debate that, or I still believe that Tina is the best deck in format by a decent amount. So I think that Tina will be if you're a Tina player, you'll be very happy about now this downfall of the deck.
Okay. And Ursi, we'll flip it over to you now. Tina is a pretty straightforward deck now that we saw John Eng, win with it. We have a skeleton of what the deck is going to look like, but there are some cards that people are debating. Now, I see Manaphy in and out of these lists and Spiritomb in and out of these lists. What do you think of those single prize Pokemon in a Giratina list? Are they worth it? Do you think that you should just up the consistency level? What are your thoughts there?
I think that largely depends on what you expect the meta to be, whether you think that Spirit Tomb's really going to help you in the matchups that you face, if Manaphy is going to help you with that, and it's really just determining what you think is going to be what you face. And it's just a personal opinion of each player.
Okay, absolutely. Jumping over to you, Jem, on the thoughts about Tina, because I know that for the past couple of meta forecasts, we've talked about Tina a lot. So not too much to say. But would you say it's more or less the point people are switching off Tina because they don't know how to play from behind? They want to play aggressively, because that's my personal thoughts, is people want to jump off the deck because they don't know how to let their opponent take a couple of prizes so they can get ahead. Would you agree with that thought?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that thought for like kind of your very average kind of player where, you know, you're not testing every single deck in the format. Maybe you're preparing as much as other players. Because in a sense, Tina kind of has that same taste after playing some reps with it with Gardevoir, where you could fall very behind, but just being in that situation and seeing all of those lines so many times, you know that you could still win a game. Like there was a game where I went down 4 prizes before taking anything playing Tina, and I still came back and won the game because Roxanne Path is super strong. So I think, yeah, I'm kind of with you in the essence of people don't really want to play a super intricate deck. It's not one of those decks where you could just pick up, have fun, go to your cup, and just like make cut with it without any kind of testing, any kind of, really analyzing the meta. Whereas that can happen with decks like Miraidon, Roaring Moon, Mew. Not to say that they're easy, but probably a player who's played for a little bit of time can at least kind of adapt to the basic sequencing, the basic combinations to decks like those where they could run it and pilot it pretty well. Whereas Gardevoir and Giratina are definitely kind of investment decks. You have to get repetitive reps, definitely being able to know what's in your prizes, what resources you have access to is a really big impact on the game, whereas that might not impact decks like Roaring Moon or Miraidon too much. Gotcha. So yeah, I think the intricacy of the deck scares players, makes them a little bit hesitant to pick it up.
Gotcha. And Jerrick, as far as it goes, obviously over on the other side of the pond, over in Europe, there are a lot of not Guardy stands, but Giratina stands that love the deck, absolutely love piloting it. And we see from a lot of these people, they're lowering the switch count and they're upping the path count. Do you think that that's correct? Do you think that in this meta, path is definitely more worth it as a 4 of? And then maybe we don't need as many switch, because for switch cards, that matchup is pretty much free. And I'm talking about you Snorlax lovers, myself included, because I am a Snorlax lover.
I definitely think moving off less switch to more path is like, it's fine. Not that I would necessarily do it, but like the strength in Tina, like Roxanne Path is one of the main like caveats of the deck. It's like Charizard struggles late game to Roxanne Path. Other decks now, like Roaring Moon, that's seeing Rise in play, that can struggle late game to a Roxanne Path. I know Miraidon's not seeing as much play, but same thing, struggles to Roxanne Path. And then Guardy, if you see these new builds, a lot of them, at least from Knoxville, were playing maybe only 3 outs to Path to the Peak, maybe 4, but they were playing like 2 stadiums. Some had the Worker, some had the Lost Vacuum. But you could see they weren't really prioritizing bumping Path to the Peak. So I'm like all in favor for the change. However, Giratina, on the flip side, is a little bit harder to pilot. Early flower selectings can kind of hurt you in the late game. So I think having like that extra path can also give you a little bit of lenience in the early game. If you hit one early and you're like, oh, I really need to keep this Tina. Oh, I really need to keep this Mirage Gate. It's fine. You have 3 other paths instead of the 2. And then the Jet Energies, of course, you still have 4. Those are ways to switch in and out of the active. So even going a little less in switch cards to just kind of help your late game be stronger, I think is fine. And then as you said, we know in Europe, there are a bunch of Giratina stands. So I don't think Giratina's going anywhere. I think it's really good. I don't think it's like the best deck in the format, but let me save myself before everyone comes after me. So best deck in format and best play in format are like 2 different things to me. Like I think this entire format, Gardevoir has been the best deck in the format. because in terms of its strongest deck, what it could do, it has come from behind playability. It's got one prize attackers. It's got everything going for it. Makes it the best deck in the format. Again, that doesn't always mean it's the best play. I think Tina, for a very long time, has been the best play in the format because of some of the things like Roxanne Path, single prize attackers, Star Requiem, things like that. So we'll still see a heavy dose of Tina.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the record, unfortunately, Vinny is 3-0 against TSS members right now. So shout out to you, Vinny, if you're watching at home. Keep doing
Hasn't
Tina
played me.
things over there. Hasn't played you with Tina yet. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Now I do want to kind of flip the script a little bit. We're talking about all of these meta decks. And there is one meta deck in this question I want to ask you, Jem. Let's talk about some of these last ride decks for the format, because again, this is probably the last big regional on that side of the world before we get rotation in April. So we're going to talk about two decks. The big ones obviously are going to be Rapid Strike and Mew VMAX. Now, both of these decks have had their time, have seen their regionals placements. What do you think we're going to see over in Germany for these two decks?
I would say probably anywhere from 5 to 7% for both of these decks, which is probably honestly where this meta is now, more than both should be represented. But as you referred to it as kind of a last ride thing, I know that Rapid Strike does do very well over there. People are probably going to want to do their yoga loops one last time. People are going to want to Technoblast one last time. So there's probably people out there that have it sleeved up and they're like, I know that this isn't the play, but it's my last chance. I'm just going to send it. And that's what people are going to do. And honestly, respect, like if you have that much love for a deck, you're cool with the results. You just want to play one more time at a major event. I don't blame you. So yeah, I mean, I did that with Guardy. So I don't blame anyone.
Now, Jerrick, would you agree or disagree with playing either of these decks, and why?
I think like Rapid Strike theoretically always seems like a strong play, but I don't think it sees the numbers that it does see because the deck's inconsistent, a little bit of a brick fest, and it takes a horrible Mew matchup. But with Mew dying down, maybe it will see more play, especially the one last ride factor. It might see more play than usual, but I don't think it'll see more than 5%. Now, Mew is a completely different story. It's dominated the format since it's been legal. It's always been a deck people have had to watch out for, tech for, test against, and it's not in a bad spot in the meta right now. I know Roaring Moon and Charizard are obviously unfavorable matchups for it, but sometimes matchup roulette's in your favor, and you might dodge all the Roaring Moons in a tournament. Judge Path, you can still beat Zard. It's not as bad as everyone says. And again, the last ride factor for the people that really love, techno blasting their way to victory. I think they're going to sleeve it up one more time and give it a fine send off.
Yep. And coming from somebody that's played both decks to regionals and seems to be able to play any deck that he sleeves up, Ian, what do you think about these two decks with the heavier Lost Box matchups that we're going to see, whether it's Giratina or the other matchups, as well as Roaring Moon? Do we think that these are strong against both of those style of decks?
I think at least the Mew is. Rapid Strike, I think, is a pretty weak deck currently with having flaws against, and it has a bad Roaring Moon matchup, and Mew, which is really bad currently in this format, and the fact that the deck bricks, so, it's a little worse than always is in theory. While Mew, I think, is actually probably going to do very well because some of the, quote, bad matchups being like Charizard and Roaring Moon aren't actually as bad as I say. I think people, like the general consensus is on it. So I think Mew is probably still a very strong play and will do well until it rotates in, 2 months?
Yeah.
2 months.
We get this one, and then we get Vancouver. Vancouver is going to be the next forecast, so spoiler alert, stick around and watch the channel for that here next month. But flipping over to you, Ursi, now you've played some Mew in the past, and granted, it might have been against a 4 Drapion deck, but what version of Mew VMAX would you sleeve up and play with? Do you like Fusion Mew more, or do you think that the DTE version of Mew might be the better play for something like this?
Wow factor, I always love Fusion Mew. I love the donk. You're like going through everything, like donk, 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 donk. But I think DTE is like fairly more consistent, at least how I've like seen it. I do think the what is the grass guy?
Oh,
Excelgor?
Excelgor, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's always interesting with the Charizard and I guess Roaring Moon as well. I have not played Mew at all since Charizard has come out, so I'm not sure how it really does. But I've heard scary things about the Excelgor, so maybe it'll do well.
Yeah, that would be
Which is
kind of
Fusion
fun.
Mew.
Yeah, Fusion Mew with Excelgor seems like it could be a very valid play with the amount of, Charizard and Roaring Moon. So I think that that's definitely a valid option to throw in. I do think that if we're talking about inconsistent decks like Rapid Strike, that might be a more inconsistent way to play Mew. But regardless, if you just want to throw it out there and play Mew one last time, I think Excelgor is definitely a valid point for your list. So now we're going to talk about the top 3 decks that are going to be played in numbers. So what I'm going to do is we're going to kick it back over and talk to Jerrick. Jerrick, I'm going to have it start with you. What do you think the top 3 or most played decks are going to be for this event?
For this event, I think the most played decks, I'm still going to go and say Charizard's going to be the number 1 most played deck. Again, for the reasons I said before. Number 2, which actually really surprised me this past weekend in Knoxville, but I think that trend stays the same, will be Roaring Moon. Again, Miraidon players, I think, are going to shift onto it. Roaring Moon's also a newer deck that popped up, so people are going to be excited to play it. It's really consistent. It's extremely fast. It does what it needs to do. And over a 15-round, 2-day tournament, you can set up more times than your opponent. And for the third most played deck, I am stuck between Tina and Guardy, but I think I'm going to say Guardy just because it won Knoxville. And again, Guardy and Tina are kind of the same, sort of the same thing. They have a quote one of my good friends, Tyler, shout out Tyler Matthews, told me, sometimes you got to fall behind to get ahead. That's kind of the idea with like Guardy and Tina decks, where it's like, it's okay to go down a few prizes. I just think since Guardy won, and again, things like Mirage Step are going to rotate. The Refinement Curly are going to rotate. Shining Arcana, Gardevoir is going to rotate. This is one of the last chances, too, to kind of give it one big, strong send-off. And it does have good matchups, so I'll just go with that one at number 3.
Okay. And Ian, would you agree or disagree with those top 3 for Charizard?
I think I mostly agree. At least I think Charizard number 1 for sure.
Yep.
I would say Giratina number 2 just because the deck's been the most popular and I assume the trend's going to stay the same. I could be wrong on that one, though. But I would say I think Gardevoir 3rd because the fact that Moonlit Hill is getting printed and a lot of people are going to play Gardevoir because of it. Not because the card is worth playing Gardevoir for, but, new cool card that's been hyped in Japan for a while. Should play Gardevoir, right? So, and then I'll say Roaring Moon's 4th. Like, all those are very close, though, just because there's so many decks in the format. There won't be one dominant deck in meta percentage. So where one of those, I think those 4 decks would is up to you, really.
Okay.
That's what I think is most spectacle.
Gotcha. Ursi, would you pick the same 3 decks, or you have other opinions on what top 3 most played decks would be?
There's been 4 talked about, but I do think it'll be Charizard, Roaring Moon, and then I think Lost Box personally, but
Okay.
like really close with Gardevoir.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely just a Lost Box variant, whether it's Sablezard or other box. Jem, would you think that we're going to see more Lost Box numbers, or what are your top 3?
Yeah, we'll definitely see more Lost Box. I think for my top 3, I'll have a little bit of a spicy take. I'll say Gardevoir is going to be 1, and I think with the big win and then the inclusion of the stadium and our ability to kind of just farm these top things, the Zard, Moon, and then have an even matchup with Tina, I think maybe these Tina players might be down to switch over to Guardy and realize it's pretty similar in terms of like falling behind, setting up, getting your resources, managing your resources properly, having hand disruption, all that kind of stuff, counter catchers. So yeah, I'll take a hot take. I'll say that the Tina players and the Guardy players will all come together. We'll play Guardy, and then I'll say Zard and Moon at 2 and 3.
Got it. Okay. Very fair. Now we're going to go over to my favorite part of this meta forecast, and it's going to be the rogue decks. spicy rogue decks we're all going to pick here. And because you guys are new with us here on the Meta Forecast, we're going to start it off with Ursi. Ursi, why don't you tell me what your favorite rogue deck that you want to see do well over in Germany for this regionals is and why?
Unrealistically, I want Espathra to do really well. I think it'd be hilarious.
Yeah.
She only needs like 1 energy versus Charizard, or like 2 maybe, whatever it is. Like 1 versus a Roaring Moon. OP if you only face Roaring Moon and Charizard. Realistically, I like Godengo a lot, especially with the Palkia and Greninja, if that counts.
Gotcha. All right, very cool decks, both of them for sure. Ian, do you have any rogue decks that you really like?
I do. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, let's get some cloth representation in day 2. I want to see all the cloth.
Yes.
If you don't face Guardy, which is I think pretty unrealistic, but if you don't face Guardy, the deck's really good.
Yeah, just dodge the Guardy, put that plot armor, have Alex Szymanski send it over to you in the mail, and you can play cloth and just go from there. Now, Jem, what is your preferred rogue deck that you would love to see do well at this upcoming event?
For sure. Well, for those of you who know me and my brother pretty well, you guys know the answer. We want to see Goldango EX pop off. I would love to see it in top 8. I would love to see him make it rain all over Germany. And for sure, like, shout out to the Church of Dango. We're taking over. We put it on the scene at Charlotte, and then we saw some real good representation in Knoxville. People were kind of popping off. LDF popped off, so shout out to LDF. He went crazy. And, it's gaining popularity. We got a graphic on the second page. So maybe one day, if the church stays strong, we'll get to the first page. We just got to believe. We got to keep grinding. And just wait till rotation. It's over.
That's right. That's right. Jerrick, do you have any alternative opinions other than Dango? Because we know that you both love Dango. So anything else that you'd like to see do well?
Yeah, so not like I'm biased to the recent top 32 with Dango, so I won't say the Dango. But interestingly enough, I don't know if you'll count this as Rogue, but Zoro Box, not like a particular variant, but like the stage 1 Zoro Box, like the little evolution Pokemon. I think there's a couple stage 1s that might be unexplored. So like the Skull Villain into Roaring Moon now, it's a little bit better of a matchup. Of course, still has the Mighty Yenna for Mew VMAX, but I think there's a couple other stage 1s that do well into some of these top tier decks. And some of its big weaknesses before, like kind of cleaned up with Jirachi. Like Jirachi Manaphy helps save you from things like Greninja, Sableye, and Lost Box. So I don't know. I'd love to see that deck do well. It's one of my favorites.
Okay. Absolutely.
Small warning: one of my friends went 1-8 with this deck this season, so after Paradox Rift, so just giving a little warning.
Oof. I know that there's some.
His 1-1 was a buy, so.
Respect for trying. Respect though.
Hey, if you want to play it though, the deck is cool. I'll give it that.
Yeah, I think that there might be some cards maybe in Paldean Fates that nobody's thought of that could be kind of cool in there. But yeah, the deck seems to be super inconsistent. But I do love a good Zoro box, as most players do, because it's very fun to play. Now, my personal picks, there's one that's kind of meta-ish and one that's not. So the first one I'll talk about is the one that nobody sees, but I've been seeing it pop up online, and that's Venomoth, because it kind of disappeared for a little while, and I feel like a good grass attacker that also item locks, that also can maybe throw some disruption cards in there, could be fun. I think I would love to watch that on stream, somebody pull up with Venomoth and do some things. And then another one, shout out to Chicago local Tyler Matthews. I think that maybe the Anti-Iron Valiant might have something to say about all of those Gardevoirs out there in the meta and see how that can do. I did see him whoop a couple of Tinas out there in day 1 over in Knoxville. So I think that would definitely be a really cool deck to also see at Dortmund.
Shout out to Midday.
Shout out to Midday. Hey. All right, so speaking of shout outs, we're going to give everybody here a chance to shout out their sponsors or anybody at home and let you know where you can find them too. But thank everybody here so much for joining us on this Meta Forecast. We're going to start it off again back with Jeremy. Jeremy, where can everybody find you and any shout outs that you want to give tonight?
For sure. Well, for everything Pokemon, you could find me at GemG TCG on Twitter. And in terms of my shout outs, shout out to the Shuffle Squad, best sponsors, best team out there. Shout out to all of my friends, the testing group. And then, of course, shout out to my girlfriend. She takes care of the dogs while I'm at these events. So gives me a lot of flexibility to be able to go and compete at all of these events. And then, of course, shout out Candace.
Yep, absolutely. And we're going to hop it over to Jerrick. Jerrick, what type of shout outs do you want to give, and where can everybody find you?
So you can find me on Twitter at JG_Panda. That's kind of where I'm at for all things Pokemon. For shout outs, obviously shout out to the Shuffle Squad, best sponsors, best teams. And then also shout out my girlfriend, Amanda. Thank you for just always loving me and supporting me so I can, compete every weekend, have fun in a children's card game. And then shout out to Blake.
Yeah. And Ursi, you haven't been on here, but we want to know where people can find you as well as where you want to give those shout outs.
So you can find me anywhere under Ursiiday. I have same name, Twitter, Twitch, kind of YouTube that I don't use. But yeah, shout out to my awesome Twitch community. Shout out to y'all for having me on here, and my community for always supporting me. So yeah.
Very cool. And Ian, any shout outs and where people can find you?
You can find me on X on Ian _Robb, and shout out to the Shuffle Squad, of course, for being a great sponsor. And Blake, please tell me that, Matt.
All right, guys, and one more time, I'm PJ here with the Shuffle Squad. If you liked anything that we had to say, you can definitely support us here by clicking any of the links down below in the video, and you can use some of the affiliate links there to save money on awesome Pokemon product as well. And if you want to check out any of our awesome guests, all of their Metafy links for coaching or their Twitch accounts, if you want to help support them a little bit more, will also be down here. So lots to check out. We'll leave you with that. Hopefully you learned something here on this Metaforecast. This is the Shuffle Squad, but we'll catch you next time.
Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. Hey trainers, tired of having too many cards lying around? I know that feeling, and I know what a hassle it is to try and sell those cards. But selling bulk is now easier than ever with TCG Bulk. Find tons of potential buyers in a single place. You just download the app, look for the best buyer near you, and carefully pack your bulk, ship it, and you get paid. It really is that simple. Turn the cards you don't want into the cards you absolutely need for your next deck. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video. Thanks again. Take it easy.